I'm talking to former U.S. Comptroller General David Walker. And David, he's sort of singing your tune. This debt is a big issue. We always tend to focus on the federal government, the $20 trillion there. But when you add unfunded obligations across the board and with everybody, you're closing in at, $85 trillion. But what do you make of what Ken Langone was saying? This is a ticking time bomb.
Well, Neil, first, it's good to be back with you. I think we have to recognize the reality that there's not a party of fiscal responsibility anymore. Really, we need to think about how we're keeping score, because how you keep score matters. What matters to me is not deficits per se and not debt per se, but what does matter tremendously is how much debt do we have as a percentage of the economy. Right now, if you just count public debt, it's about 80% of GDP. If you count debt held by if you count total debt, including trust fund debt, it's over 100% of GDP. We really need to get it down to about 60% by 2040. And when you look at this tax reform plan, debt to GDP is expected to go up, not down. And what we've got to do is recognize that we've got to start dealing with the 70% of spending that's on autopilot. You want to grow the economy through pro-growth tax reform. You need to constrain spending, including the 70% of spending that's on autopilot. And until we do that, we're increasing our risk of a serious adverse effect in the future.
But we don't do that, right? I mean, you talk about addressing spending and all of that. Even when we try to address the growth in spending, the growth in entitlement spending, the growth and just shade the growth a little bit, it creates like a nuclear reaction on both sides. And I'm wondering where that's going.
Well, let me tell you what we need to do. The process is broken. We've only had timely appropriations bills 4 times in the last 66 years, and the debt ceiling limit doesn't work. Let me tell you what we need to do. We need to get rid of the mechanisms we now have that could potentially cause a shutdown, and we ought to say that, look, if you haven't passed a timely budget and all the appropriations bills by the beginning of the fiscal year, which is 10/1, then no budget, no pay until you do it. Secondly, there's an automatic continuing resolution based upon last year's spending levels, eliminating any non-recurring spending from that. Thirdly, get rid of the debt ceiling limit. It hasn't worked. We need to go to specific targets and triggers for debt to GDP with automatic enforcement mechanisms if they don't work. We need to separate.
But we don't do anything about automatic mechanisms, right? I mean, we have automatic, agreements that we kept to with the 2011 accord between President Obama and the Republican Congress, and they're always trying to find a way, both sides, to wiggle out of that. In fact, as we speak now.
Well, we're addicted to deficits and debt. And as I said, neither party is fiscally responsible. There are too few members that care about fiscal responsibility. We're mortgaging the future of our kids and grandkids at record rates at a time that they're going to face a lot tougher competition in the future. Look, but as I said, the process is broken. How you keep score matters. If we focus on debt to GDP and we have automatic mechanisms that if you don't hit these targets, where mandatory and discretionary spending is hit, as well as revenues. All three have to be impacted. If we do that, then I think we have a much better chance of having fiscal discipline and ultimately forcing onto the table the 70% of spending that has not been addressed that must be addressed.
Can you imagine, I mean, rates have been, historically low, what a slight uptick, rates would have on $20 trillion just in the existing federal government debt?
Well, as it is, Neil, I mean, the Congressional Budget Office projects that for the next 10 years, the highest and fastest growing expense in the federal budget is interest. And, what do you get for interest? Nothing. And by the way, these issues that we're facing at the federal level are also being faced by a number of states, including my state in Connecticut. I mean, its budget is out of control. Right. Too much of the budget is mandatory spending. Unfunded retirement obligations, both at the federal level and the state level, are the cancer that we've got to come to grips with in an equitable and sustainable way in order to create a better future.